Germany's new chancellor has vowed to build the strongest army in Europe,
promising to supercharge the country's armed forces after years of neglect.
To the German chancellor, Russia's actions in Ukraine have changed everything.
We are in an era of rearmament.
Hello and welcome to the Nexus. Germany is preparing for war in a way we haven't seen in a very long time. Should we be concerned? For many years after World War II, Germany's military was very tightly restricted. But now, 80 years after the Nazis were defeated, Germany is preparing to turbocharge its army, just in case Russia invades. Is that a good idea? We'll hear from the experts in just a moment.
The big threat from Russia will emerge as soon as the war in Ukraine comes to a close.
This is false talk, false premise, designed to serve the interests of a military-industrial elite.
Germany's defense capacity is not credible.
More from them coming up, but first a quick look at what's going on in Germany.
German troops moving into Lithuania. Symbolically, a site that would have proved too much for many people before February 2022.
The idea that Germany could have a leading role as a military power doesn't, let's put it mildly, bring good associations.
But Russian troops invading Ukraine changed everything. German troops are back in Eastern Europe. The 45th Armoured Brigade will be fully deployed in Lithuania by 2027.
Today marks a step into a new era. Never before have we permanently stationed a large military unit abroad.
Anger and fear of Moscow has pushed Berlin to what it calls Zeitenwende, a turning point.
The head of the German armed forces has told DW News that Germany needs to be ready for war in order to prevent it.
We have 5 to 8 years. And 5 to 8 years when the reconstitution of the Russian forces is at a level that an attack against NATO territory might be possible.
Olaf Scholz, Chancellor when Russia sent troops into Ukraine, pledged a €100 billion fund to modernise Germany's armed forces and committed to NATO's defence spending target of 2% of GDP. New Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who served in the military himself, has gone even further. He changed the constitution so more money can be borrowed to spend on the military. The fund is now €500 billion. And he's pledging to increase defence spending to 5% of GDP by 2032. Merz has big ambitions.
Die Bundeswehr braucht, konventionell zur stärksten Armee Europas zu werden.
Germany will need every penny if it truly wants to build the strongest military in Europe. Its equipment is outdated, infrastructure poor, and it struggles to attract recruits. Because all of this is a frankly historic departure for post-war Germany.
Many Germans are inherently wary of war and the military, and that comes down a lot of the time to the country's recent history.
The legacy of guilt from World War II saw strict constitutional limits put in place, and with the US-led NATO guaranteeing protection, Berlin concentrated on becoming an economic powerhouse. Trump has now shown NATO can no longer take US support for granted.
If they don't pay, I'm not going to defend them. No, I'm not going to defend them. I got into a lot of heat when I said that. He said, oh, he's violating NATO.
Traditionally, public opinion has shown Germans prefer diplomacy over military power, but the war in Ukraine has changed things. Polling in Germany shows strong support now for an increase in military spending. 66% say they are in favour. The times, they are a-changing.
Okay, let's bring in our guests now. And today we have David DesRoches, a former Pentagon official based in Washington, German military expert Torsten Heinrich, and Marko Gasic, an international affairs analyst based in London. Welcome to the programme, everyone. Marko, I'll start with you because I know you have some very grave concerns about Germany's plans to remilitarise.
Yeah, it's déjà vu. I mean, we had a problem with the continuity of German foreign policy between the First and the Second World War, and there's a danger of it spreading into a third. As far as I can see, this hysterical talk about the need for rearmament based on a Russian threat is based on a completely false premise. The Russians have barely managed to scrape through bits of Ukraine. They're hardly likely to want to take the rest of Europe or in a position to do so, nor would they have any reason to do so, because they have no desire for the population over there, which has no desire for them. They have no desire for the resources because they've got their loads of their own, and they have a sufficient land area to cover them 5 times over. So I say this is false talk, false premise, designed to serve the interests of a military-industrial elite. It's always the elites who ask for it and the ordinary people who pay for it.
Torsten?
Well, he's right in the fact that Russia struggles with Ukraine, but the big threat from Russia will emerge as soon as the war in Ukraine comes to a close. And the Russians have capabilities to attack again. And then again, the rearmament of Germany isn't meant to defeat Russia. It's meant to deter Russia. So the goal isn't to stop the Russians and then have a 4-year slugfest to wait until one side has bled out. The goal is to stop the Russians from even attempting. And for that, the own deterrence must be strong enough, and that it isn't. The German Inspector General of the Armed Forces said at the beginning of Russia's war against Ukraine, of the full invasion, that Germany is incapable of fighting. The ammunition storages would have been sufficient for several days. A deterrence is necessary, as Russia has proven now for the 3rd time that they are a revanchist imperialist power that is willing and capable of expanding its territory with military means. And thus it would be ludicrous to expect Russia to this time for real have enough. But the threat is continuing. Russia has proven to be a military threat, and thus the threat must be stopped, ideally without fighting, but you can only stop an aggressor without fighting if you can deter him. And for that, you need capable military forces, which Germany right now does not have.
David, do you think Germany is using Russia's aggression towards Ukraine as a pretext to rearm, or do you think it is actually warranted?
Well, it's not a pretext, it's an imperative. I agree with Torsten on this. Germany's defense capacity is not credible as a deterrent force, and they've neglected it. The fear of German militarism, I think, has been superseded. I think that there's been, 4 generations of Germans who understand this, and now they realize that militarism, the revised Wilhelmine or Hitlerite stuff, that's kind of been bred out of them. The world has changed, and just as the United States Army occupied Montreal before the United States declared independence, but now we get along pretty well with the Canadians, current president notwithstanding. Germany and France, Germany and Britain, Germany and Europe is stable. Their security role needs to be credible, and unfortunately it is not. And the United States can't be expected to indefinitely subsidize socialized economies in Europe when they don't do it themselves.
David, you say that, but there's a very famous BBC interview with the son of a former, very prominent Nazi leader. And he said, Torsten, he said, you can't trust us. He said, whilst the economy is good, okay, but if we were to suffer, say, 5 or 10 years of economic turmoil, he says, we will change.
Well, the idea then would be, who is that guy and what is his political agenda?
Hans Frank's son, yeah.
Yeah, but where is he standing politically now? Because obviously you have fractions of the German political spectrum, some of it clearly pro-Russian, that are against the rearmament. And if he's part of this, then we already have the answer why he's saying that. So we need to look at the source why he says this. The fact that he's the son of Hans Frank, the criminal who was I think Gauleiter in Poland, doesn't change that. The question is German rearmament going to be an issue? First of all, we are far away from being even capable of being a threat. That's even with a significant rearmament, Germany's neighbors are still militarily stronger. The Polish army could probably right now march through the Rhine without too much of a problem. The next thing is Germany's neighbors want a German rearmament. We are living in a world where the Polish would hope for a stronger German army, where the Polish people wish for German soldiers on Polish soil to protect them from the Russians.
Let me put that to Marko, if I may. Marko, Germany's neighbors want a militarily strong Germany to protect them from Russia.
once again, the entire conversation, especially Torsten's, is based on a false premise. Deterrence. The best way of deterring anyone is to have good relations with them. You don't have to spend billions of euros arming against them to deter them from attacking you if they like you, if they are happy with trading with you. And we had decades of peaceful prosperity for Germany with no deterrence of the kind being envisaged. Russia was perfectly happy to buttress German prosperity for decades and had no plans to change anything in that until the NATO expansion to Russia's gullet, to Russia's throat, with a militarized campaign which brooked no dissent, despite all the promises NATO and Germany made to Russia at the end of the Cold War in 1990. All the false promises. The best way of deterring anybody is to have good relations with them, and Germany is in no position to get a better outcome for itself, for its people, by rearming, risking war, and spending all the family money on investing on insanity instead of infrastructure.
Torsten, just a quick question.
I perfectly agree. I perfectly agree with him. Good relations are a way to deter war, but for good relations, two parties are necessary. And if one of them is willing to invade its neighbors, if one of them is willing to commit massacres and large-scale war crimes with the attempt to expand its own territory, then good relations, if one side simply tries to be nice, will not be sufficient.
Marko, I have to move to David. Marko, I have to move to David, I'm afraid, otherwise we won't get him in. David, we know that Germany has just launched its first permanent troop deployment overseas since World War II, a 5,000-strong armoured brigade in Lithuania. What signal is Germany putting out there?
Well, I would argue that Germany's deployment in Afghanistan, while it wasn't permanent, it was far more significant, and particularly because they took casualties. And I was in Afghanistan in March 2003 when the Germans lost a number of soldiers in an ambush. And honestly, we expected a bunch of planes to take off in the middle of the night, wake up the next morning and say, where are the Germans? So they have already accepted a role here. Look, my opinion, Marko's opinion, Torsten's opinion, they're important, but look at somebody like the Swedes, who have 400 years of neutrality, and they are very good at managing their own affairs. They've determined that Russia is a threat, and the centuries-long tradition of neutrality cannot be abided in an era of rampant Russian imperialism. And until we invent the love bomb and drop it around the world, unfortunately, you have to have military credibility in order to enforce the values that you see are there. German values are Western values. You know, I taught the German War College last Tuesday. They were here in Washington. There have been German bases in the United States, and we all get along. So the question is, what is the place of Germany in the world? And right now, their security place, their security capabilities are out of alignment with their values and their ambitions, and with Western values and ambitions.
David, watching
there's not a contradiction.
David, watching events from Washington, when you see Germany deploying 5,000 men to Lithuania, for example, what do you make of that? Don't you feel that to be provocative of the Russians?
Well, so Russia claims a right to intervene in Lithuania, which was forcibly incorporated into the Soviet Union during the period of the Hitler-Stalin Pact. So two things. First, as a military man, the Germans always go in heavy. When you look at German military deployments, it's kind of like trying to devise the world's heaviest airplane. They usually send 5,000 guys to do a mission that 2,500 guys could do. But what this shows is Lithuania is an independent nation. It is a member of the European Union. It is a member of NATO. Maybe it wasn't a good idea to make it a member of NATO at the time, but it is, and it is a sovereign nation. This is an alliance member bolstering the sovereignty of another alliance member that Russia has claimed a right to intervene in militarily. So this is deterrence in action, and it's deterrence in accordance with Western values. And quite frankly, we need more of that from the Germans. They're able to do it in Lithuania because it's close by.
We spoke to Greece's former finance minister, YANIS Varoufakis. He's got his own personal issues with Germany, and he's quite worried about this. Let's have a listen.
Well, the idea of a rearming Germany, which is increasingly sliding into a totalitarian mire, is something to lose sleep over. Last year, I was banned from entering Germany. because I'm not a supporter of the Palestinian genocide. I am a European, not just politician, but citizen, and they saw it fit to violate every principle of the European Union without a due process. In the end, I ended up taking them to court. I am now disputing the right of the German state to ban people like me from Germany. And I discover every day, increasingly, that the rule of law is a figment of our imagination in Germany and in Europe. So if you combine rearmament with the slide into the totalitarianism of the German Federal Republic, as I said, there is plenty of reason to lose your sleep over this.
Torsten, what do you make of Yanis Varoufakis' concerns there? He says it's the last thing the world needs is a country slipping into totalitarianism, the rule of law hanging by a thread, to be rearming.
Well, that Germany has some issues is obvious, like most countries have some issues. Could it be better? Obviously too. But we could look to Freedom House, where Germany's place was, as far as I remember, the 21st. So the 21st most free country in the world, despite limitations, despite some criticism in regards to its free speech laws, for instance. And as far as I remember, Greece was behind that, without Germany being afraid of dictatorship entering politics in Greece.
Torsten, the deployment of 5,000 German soldiers to Lithuania, what is the point of that militarily?
It's a tripwire deployment. It's to show the allies inside of NATO that Germany is committed to their defense, and to show the Russians, if you invade Lithuania, you have to kill German soldiers, and for that you might probably draw Germany into war. So it's a deployment that was necessary because of Russian aggression, because the Lithuanians feel threatened like the rest of the Baltics, and this is to assure them and to make sure that Russia is deterred, and if it isn't, that Lithuania will not have to fight alone for its freedom.
David, Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer recently said that Russia is afraid of the United Kingdom's nuclear prowess, especially the Trident submarines and so on, and that would be sufficient to prevent any conflict with them. Well, he may not have gone quite that far, but do you think that Russia is scared of the UK's nuclear deterrent?
I think that it's a concern, both the French and the UK nuclear deterrent, but neither of them are adequate. For decades, there had been this idea that if you had nuclear weapons, you were immune from attack. But just in the last 2 years, we've seen China kill Indian soldiers on Indian terrain in the Himalayas. That's one nuclear power. We've seen Iran launch an attack on Israel, a presumed nuclear power. Israel launched an attack on Iran, close to nuclear power. Iran launched an attack in Pakistan, a nuclear power, and then Pakistan responding. So I think that unless you're ready to use nuclear weapons, which I don't think the Keir Starmer government is, you have to have something credible below that, and that requires a strong conventional force.
Torsten Heinrich, David DesRoches, and Marko Gasic, thank you all very much. Much appreciated. Now, can Europe rely on the United States to supply it with their best weapons? I refer particularly to the F-35 fighter jets. Some European countries are reportedly worried that the United States could shut them down remotely if Europe and America suddenly had a diplomatic falling out.
The F-35 is a fifth-generation fighter with stealth capabilities and AI built in. It's one of the most advanced jets in the air. Each one costs between $80 and $100 million for America's European allies. All these countries have bought one. Germany alone has spent over $5 billion on its fleet, almost 6% of its defence budget. But customers are concerned about rumours of a kill switch, essentially allowing the US to turn the F-35 off. That's been denied, but the F-35 does rely on a software system called Odin, and if the US stops sending updates, the jets would be severely compromised. Most European operators don't have full access to Odin. Only the UK and Israel are able to modify or audit critical systems without America's approval. So maybe there is something in it.
We'd like to tone them down about 10%, which probably makes sense because someday maybe they're not our allies, right?
Well, joining us now, we have two of the foremost experts on the F-35, Alan Williams, former head of procurement at the Canadian Defence Department. He was part of the team that acquired the F-35 for the Canadian Air Force. And Bill Sweetman, author of Trillion Dollar Trainwreck, how the F-35 hollowed out the US Air Force. Welcome to the program, both of you. Alan.
Nice to be here.
The question on everyone's mind is, do these aircraft, these fighter jets, really have some kind of kill switch on them?
I'm not sure if the right terminology is kill switch. I think it's more appropriate just to say that the US has control over the software, and in particular the mission data file. Without being able to upgrade that, the plane becomes much less effective. And if the US controls that and decides for whatever reason not to provide Canada with the upgrades, our F-35s would become totally ineffective.
And Canada apparently is looking for alternatives now to the F-35. Does that, under Mark Carney, does that mean that they are concerned?
Well, we better be concerned. You can't have someone else control your, multi-billion-dollar asset without being concerned. Up until now, the notion of the U.S. trying to exert that kind of formal oversight wasn't contemplated. I mean, we have a great relationship, fought together in World War I, World War II. NORAD, North American Air Defense, is a joint effort. Never would we have expected this kind of relationship. But when it does arise, we're a sovereign country, and to ignore it would be irresponsible.
Bill, do you think there's an actual, realistic chance that that would happen?
Well, I think that the U.S. has certainly planned for doing that. The U.S. The U.S. deliberately maintained control of the software and did not release what they call the source code to export customers. In fact, all that the mission data file that Alan was talking about, those are updated in labs in Florida at Eglin Air Force Base that are clearly under full-time U.S. control. So, and I think just to sort of emphasize on that, the mission data file is very important because an aircraft like the F-35 is a flying computer system, and everything that the system does automatically to help the pilot, such as identify targets or maintain a track that keeps the aircraft as stealthy as possible from the adversary sensors, radars out there. Everything that the aircraft does is run by the mission data file. It's a top level control over what the aircraft does.
And has the United States ever pulled the plug before?
No, they've never pulled the plug on an aircraft before. They withdrew support. I mean, a long time ago, they sold F-14s to what was then the Shah of Iran, and withdrew support after they withdrew space support and logistics support after the revolution. And in fact, that was a bit of a lesson for them because the Iranians managed to keep the aircraft operational. So I think they provided for that, but they've never been in a situation. There's never been a situation where the U.S. has really has needed to do that.
Alan, if you were procuring fighter jets for Canada today, would you be concerned by what Trump said about how the next generation of jets sold to other countries ought to be inferior, maybe 10% inferior, to the ones intended for the U.S. military?
Well, I'd be concerned about it, but in any procurement, I would go about it the same standard way. I would make sure that our military defines its requirements properly, and then I'd search around the world to find the best one. And if we thought that the risks from the American options were too great, for whatever reason, there's a lot of other options around the world that we would pursue.
Economically, though, are you sort of painted into a corner? Apparently, Denmark says it will continue to buy them despite the tensions over Greenland because they can't afford to change at this point. Is that Canada's economic reality as well?
To the contrary. I mean, the fact is this is a very, very, very expensive aircraft. Many of the options are much, much less expensive. So if we limited ours to, say, the first 16, and we bought the balance of our 88 elsewhere, we would probably be saving a lot of money.
Bill, we're coming towards the end now, but the F-47, named after the 47th President of the United States by the generals, it was their idea, apparently. Just wondering, Bill, how good is this? Apparently it's been flying around in secret for 5 years.
Well, from what we know about it, it's a large aircraft. It may not quite be a classic fighter. It may be more like a somewhere between a fighter and a bomber in its roles. It will be a lot of very sophisticated technology has been developed for it. It's got completely new engines, which are somewhat different from any jet engine we've seen before in production. And one thing we do know about it is it's going to be extremely expensive. So I think it's going to be the kind of system that the cost will rule it out for export, 10% plus, 10% minus, or whatever.
How much would you estimate?
It's been suggested that it is somewhere up around perhaps 250 to 300 million per unit, which is more than twice the F-35 cost.
Well, perhaps, Alan, you can all club together and get one. Would Canada want an F-47?
As Bill just said, I think those kinds of costs would rule it out for us, probably.
Alan Williams and Bill Sweetman, thank you both very much. Much appreciated. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. Till next week, then, goodbye.